Hi, third grade. I'm here with your lesson 115 instructional video. It's on renaming fractions today. And something that you are going to notice for today and for like the next, we have 2 more weeks left of math lessons. Several of our lessons are going to be on fractions. You might notice, hey, how come we're having way more lessons on fractions than we have? It's so concentrated. That's because we knew going into the school year that fractions are taught heavily at the end of the year, and it's May. March is when state testing would have taken place. So we knew that we needed to be teaching end of the book content in time for state testing. And so that's why a lot of the concentration in our power-ups from when we came back in January, most of those power-ups were on fractions because we knew at the end of the year it was mostly going to be fractions. And by then, state testing would be over. It's too late to teach you that stuff. The good thing is, even though we didn't have state testing, so we didn't need to know this for state testing, now we're having to do this virtual learning. And it's helpful that now when we're going over this fraction stuff, it's not the first time you're seeing it. So it's a little bit of review. So today with renaming fractions, find a fraction with a specified denominator that is equivalent to a given fraction. Now that sounds like a lot of math language. It's not as complicated as the objective makes it sound. Because you guys are pretty fluent in equivalent fractions. You guys are really good at that. So really, it's just saying, I want an equivalent fraction, but not just any equivalent fraction. I want a specific equivalent fraction. So it's not like saying I have a fraction that says 1/2, and I want to know an equivalent fraction to 1/2, and maybe you'll say 2/4, so you'll say 6/12. This is a little bit more specific. They're saying I want a fraction equivalent to 1/2, but I want it to have a denominator of 8. So there is only one correct answer, even though there's lots of fractions that are equivalent to 1/2. 4/8 would be the only correct answer for that problem. That's what we're going to be doing in the worksheet today. So your worksheet for lesson 115 says renaming fractions. It says rename fractions using the loop method, multiply the numbers in the loop and divide by the number outside the loop. Some of you are already familiar with this loop method. You're just not familiar with calling it the loop method. If you've gotten to this in accelerated math, the term that they use in accelerated math is cross multiply and divide. And cross multiply and divide just really clearly tells you what steps we're doing in the loop method. We use the loop method to cross multiply and divide. So we're going to illustrate that, and I'm going to teach you a cheat code that works some of the time. It's kind of like a half cheat code because it doesn't always work, but it's just a neat trick. You will notice that in your example and in numbers 1 through 6, they already looped for you. So they made it a little bit easier. All you need to do for all of your problems 1 through 8 is just find the missing numerator. 7 and 8, they figure by the time you get to 7 and 8, you've seen enough of the loop method that you can probably do the loop on your own. And I think that they're totally right in that. In fact, they probably could have only done like 2 or 3 with the loop method, and you guys would have been fine to do the rest, because we've been doing fractions for such a long time already. So we're going to go through the example that they give you at the top, but we're going to go through that together step by step. So the example that they gave you at the top was 3/4. So 3/4 is what I'm starting with. That's my beginning fraction. And it wants a fraction equal to 3/4, but it has to be a specific answer. I could say 6/8 is equivalent to 3/4. That's true, not the correct answer, because they want an answer with a denominator of 12. So this numerator is what I'm trying to find. What numerator would there need to be in order to make it 3/4 equivalent? So what you loop is you start with the denominator in the fraction that you don't know the whole fraction of. So I'm starting with the denominator in my unknown fraction. And you always loop diagonally. So I'm gonna loop it with the numerator in my fully known fraction. Those are the numbers you are gonna multiply. Those become your factors. So 3 times 12 equals 36. My product becomes my dividend, and I divide by the number outside the loop, by the denominator in my known fraction. So that number becomes my divisor. 36 divided by 4 equals 9. My quotient becomes my unknown numerator. So 3/4 is equivalent to 9/12. See, that's not as complicated as that objective made it sound. Now I'm going to show you a cheat code that works some of the time, because in this case, it will work. This is a cheat code that works when your numerator and your denominator are only one number apart. So if you happened to have taken home your assignment notebook on that last day before quarantine, then you have a multiplication chart at home, because there's one inside your assignment notebook. If not, you can look them up on the internet. You can either just look at it, or if you have access to a printer, you can print one off. I didn't have a multiplication chart at home because I do all my lesson planning on my Planbook app. I don't have an assignment notebook. So I printed off this multiplication chart. And if you look down the ones column, I'm not going to think about this as a multiplication chart. I'm going to think about this as an equivalent fraction cheat chart. So if I look down my ones, instead of thinking 1 times 1 is 1, I'm going to look at like, hey, here's 1/2. 1/2 is the same as 2/4, is the same as 3/6, is the same as 4/8. And I'm just going to look down that line and see a whole bunch of equivalent fractions. So our fraction was 3/4. I'm going to highlight around that box so it's easier to see. You can maybe saw that it was already kind of colored in. I tried recording this video before, and the dogs are being really, really obnoxious. So they're in timeout in separate rooms right now, so that I can record this without that distraction. But that gave me a chance to get a darker highlighter as well. So 3/4, I'm going to look at the 3 and the 4. Instead of thinking, hey, this is 1 times 3 and 1 times 4, nope, ignore those factors. This is 3/4. And I know I need a denominator of 12. So I'm going to look across till I see 12 on the bottom. The 9 is what's going to end up on top. So 3/4 is equivalent to 9/12. So I just had to look down till I saw the denominator that I was looking for. So if you look at 2 adjacent columns in your multiplication chart, you can look down those lines as equivalent fractions, but you have to make sure you're not leaving that line. If I'm looking for a denominator of 12, I'm not just looking for 12 anywhere on my chart, because here's a 12, but 10/12 is not the same as 3/4. 9/12 is the same as 3/4. You have to stay in the same line. Okay, we're going to try one where we can't use that cheat code though, because the loop method always works. The cheat code doesn't work with every single example. And sometimes you're going to get into fractions where you're going to have numbers that aren't even on your multiplication chart. We're going to be using bigger numbers. So we're going to try 5/12. Make sure I'm still in frame. 5/12. And we want to find an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 24. So I don't know that numerator. I'm going to take the denominator in my unknown fraction and loop it with the numerator in my known fraction. So it's going to be 5 and 24 as my factors, 5 times 24. And if we're getting into higher numbers and it's a little tough, like I can kind of break this down and use distributive property and say it's going to be easier to divide that by 2 and multiply that by 2 and then multiply them together. That can get complicated though. So you can feel free to set that up vertically if that's going to be easier for you. I'm going to look at 5 times 4 is 20. Carry over my 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. So that's going to equal 120. 120 is going to become my dividend. And the denominator in my known fraction, the number outside the loop, that 12 is going to be my divisor. So it's going to be 120 divided by 12. And I lucked out because I've got that extra 0 on there. I'm going to add my 0 in right away. 12 divided by 12 would be 1. So my unknown numerator is 10. 5/12 is equivalent to 10/24. We're going to try one more. And then I'm going to set you loose. We're going to do 4/5. So the cheat code would work for this one, but we're not going to use it. We're still going to use loop method. 4/5, and I want to have an equivalent fraction with 30 as my denominator. So need to find that numerator. Loop the denominator in my unknown fraction with the numerator in my known fraction. We always go diagonal. So it's going to be 4 times 30. And I might look at this and say, ooh, that's a double-digit number. That's not in my number rolls. That's way higher than 12. However, it's got that 0 in there, so I can do offset multiplication. 4 times 3 is 12, and add my 0 on the end. So 4 times 30 is 120. That becomes my dividend. Divide it by the number outside the loop. 120 divided by 5. Maybe you can look at that and figure it out. Maybe you need to set it up like long division. That's fine. 1 divided by 5, I can't do that. I need to use a placeholder. 0 times 5 is 0. 1 minus 0 is 1. Bring down my 2. I can divide 12 by 5. 5 can go into 12 2 times. 2 times 5 is 10. 12 minus 10 is 2. I am writing this really crooked. Bring down my 0. 20 divided by 5. 20 is a multiple of 5. That will fit in an even 4 times. So 120 divided by 5 is 24. My unknown numerator is 24. 4/5 is the same as 24 over 30. So again, on your worksheet, 1 through 6, they looped for you. So you just need to multiply the numbers that they looped, divide by the one they didn't loop, and all you need to do is figure out the numerator. You don't need to figure out anything else. 7 and 8, you are going to have to loop on your own, but if you get confused, just look at how they looped it on the 1 through 6, or play back this video and it'll help you out. You guys are going to do great on this assignment. I definitely know that.